Namaste friends, today's topic is Nuremberg trials. Have you heard about it? Well, the Nuremberg trials were a series of military tribunals held after World War II by Allied forces. Now the Allies or the Allied forces of the World War II called the United Nations from January 1, 1942 declaration. They were the countries that together opposed the Rome, Berlin, Tokyo Axis powers during the Second World War 1939 to 1945. The Allies promoted the alliance as a means to control German, Japanese and the Italian aggression under international law and the laws of the war. The trials were most notable for the prosecution of prominent members of the political, military, judicial and economic leadership of Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany was the common English name for Germany between 1933 and 1945 when Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party NSDAP controlled the country through dictatorship. Under Hitler's rule, Germany became a totalitarian state when nearly all aspects of life were controlled by the government, who planned, carried out or otherwise participated in Holocaust. The Holocaust, also known as Shoah, was World War II's genocide of European Jews between 1941 and 1945 across German-occupied Europe, when Nazi Germany and its collaborators systematically murdered some 6 million Jews, around two-thirds of Europe's Jewish population, and committed other war crimes. Friends, war crime is an act that constitutes a serious violation of the laws of war that gives rise to individual criminal responsibility. Examples of war crimes include intentionally killing civilians or prisoners, torturing, destroying civilian property, taking hostages, performing perfidy, raping, using child soldiers, and pillaging. The trials were held in Nuremberg. Nuremberg is the second largest city of the German federal state of Bavaria after its capital Munich. The trials marked a turning point between classical and contemporary international law. The first and best known trials was that of the major war criminals before the International Military Tribunal, that is IMT. It was described as the greatest trial in history by Sir Norman Burkett, a British barrister, judge, politician, preacher who served as the alternate British judge during the Nuremberg trials and one of the British judges present throughout. The trial was held between 20th of November 1945 up to 1st October 1946. The tribunal was given the task of trying 24 of the most important political and military leaders of the Third Reich. Reich is a German word analogous to the English word meaning realm of a king. Let me list and narrate a few names who were tried in Nuremberg trials. Let me begin with Martin Bormann, who had died in May 1945, but the fact was not known to the Allies, and he was tried in absentia. Martin Ludwig Bormann was a German Nazi party official and head of Nazi party chancellery. He gained immense power by using his position as Adolf Hitler's private secretary to control the flow of information and access to Hitler. After Hitler's suicide on 30th April 1945, another defendant, Robert Ley, committed suicide within a week of his trial's commencement. Adolf Hitler killed himself by a gunshot on 30th April 1945 in his Führer bunker in Berlin. Eva Braun, his wife, too committed suicide along with him by taking cyanide in accordance with Hitler's prior written and verbal instructions that afternoon. Their remains were carried up the stairs through the bunker's emergency exit. It was doused in petrol and set alight in the Reich Chancellery garden outside the bunker. Records in the Soviet archives show that their burned remains were recovered and interred in successive locations until 1946. They were further exhumed again and cremated in 1970, and the ashes were scattered. Hitler had retreated to his bunker on January 16 after deciding to remain in Berlin for the last great siege of the war. 55 feet under the Chancellery, Hitler's headquarters as Chancellor, the shelter contained 18 small rooms and was fully self-sufficient with its own water and electricity supply. He went out very rarely, once to decorate a squadron of Hitler Youth, and spent most of the time micromanaging what was left of the German defenses and entertaining guests such as Hermann Göring, Heinrich Himmler, and Joachim von Ribbentrop. At his side was Eva Braun, whom he married only 2 days before their double suicide, and his dog, an Alsatian named Blondie. Warned by officers that the Russians were only a day or so away from overtaking the Chancellery and urged him to escape to Berchtesgaden, a small town in the Bavarian Alps where Hitler owned a home. But the dictator instead chose suicide. It is believed that both he and his wife swallowed cyanide capsules, which had been tested for its efficacy on his beloved dog and her pups. And for good measure, he even shot himself with his own service pistol. The bodies of Hitler and Eva Braun were cremated in Chancellery Garden by the bunker survivors as per Führer's orders, and reportedly later recovered in part by Russian troops. A German court finally officially declared Hitler dead, but not until 1956. Adolf Hitler and Joseph Goebbels, a German Nazi politician and a Reich minister for propaganda of the Nazi Germany from 1933 to 1945, had both committed suicide in the spring of 1945 to avoid capture. Heinrich Himmler, another leader of the Nazi party, attempted to commit suicide but was captured before he could succeed. He committed suicide one day after being arrested by the British forces. On the other hand, Heinrich Müller, better known as Gestapo Müller, the SS Gestapo chief of Hitler, who was central to planning the Holocaust, disappeared the day after Hitler's suicide. He was the most senior figure of the Nazi regime, whose fate remains unknown. He was neither captured nor confirmed to have died. Further, Reinhard Heydrich, a high-ranking German SS and police official of the Nazi era and the main architect of Holocaust, was assassinated by Czech partisans in 1942. Joseph Tubawan, another Nazi leader, killed himself with dynamite in Norway in 1945. Adolf Eichmann fled to Argentina to avoid capture but was apprehended by Israel's intelligence service, Mossad, and hanged after a trial in Jerusalem in 1962. Hermann Göring was sentenced to death, but he committed suicide by swallowing cyanide the night before his execution. Primarily conducted in Nuremberg were the first initial trials adjudicated by International Military Tribunal. Further trials of lesser war criminals were conducted under Control Council Law No. 10 at the US Nuremberg Military Tribunal, NMT, which included the doctors' trials and the judges' trials who were part of the war crimes. The categorization of crimes and the constitution of the court represented juridical advance that was to be followed afterward by the United Nations for the development of an international jurisprudence in matters of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and wars of aggression, and led to the creation of the International Criminal Court. For the first time in international law, the Nuremberg indictments also mentioned genocide, count 3 war crimes, the extermination of racial and national groups against the civilian population of certain occupied territories in order to destroy particular races and classes of people, national, racial, or religious groups, particularly Jews, Poles, Gypsies, and others. A precedent for trying those accused of war crimes had also been set up at the end of the World War I in the Leipzig war crimes trials. The Leipzig war crimes trials were a series of trials held in 1921 to try alleged German war criminals of the First World War before the German Reichsgericht, that is the Supreme Court in Leipzig, as part of the penalties imposed on the German government under the Treaty of Versailles. Only 12 individuals were brought to trial with mixed results, and the proceedings were widely regarded at the time as a failure. In the longer term, however, the trials were seen as a significant step towards the introduction of a comprehensive system for the prosecution of violations of international law. So, friends, indeed the world is very deadly, and once you go through these tales of World War, you really come to know to what extent man can go to grab power. That's all I have for today. Namaste, and see you next week.